All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, before I get started, I'd like to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Racha HaKwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who taught me this truth and rule well. Peace and blessings unto the hopeful elect, pushing his word throughout the four corners of the earth in truth, righteousness, and sincerity. To USA Shalom. This is the brother Yeshaya coming at you again through spirit and power of Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Back with another lesson. Um, this one's going to be entitled Amalek and the Atlantic Slave Trade. All right. And, I got this article, that I found in Substack. And, whoever wrote this, I don't even know who this guy is. I know this says Tima Yenis. Tima Yenis. But this guy goes in, this guy goes into a lot of the history, as you see on the title, the Jays and the Atlantic Slave Trade, right? So this guy goes in a lot of the history that these tiny tops, uh, 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 pretty much of these tiny tops having a major hand in the trafficking of Israelites, all right? And we're going to touch on this. We're going to go into it. I'm not going to go into everything because this is a lot right here, a lot of history, but I'm going to hit some points and get some precepts, and Lord willing, this be edifying. But let's go ahead and start with reading a little bit of this. So I'm going to start from right here. It says, the topic of Jayish involvement in the Atlantic slave trade remains a contentious and often avoided subject within the academic community. The very mention of this issue can provoke accusations of anti-Shem, right? Creating a significant barrier to open and objective historical inquiry, right? And these small hats are big crybabies. They're major. What do you call it? They're pretty much the masters of gaslighting. You know, and they always try to point the finger somewhere else. Always try to avoid accountability. Always trying to say, "Oh, this is anti-Shem. This is and that and that." You know what I'm saying? So it's just a lot of even with the history. A lot of history is not really brought up, or a lot of history has been erased due to the fact of these tiny tops not wanting this information to be, out in the public. And this is the reason why we're about to see a lot of pretty much restriction on free speech and a lot of restriction on information. You even had I can't remember who it was. It might have been one of the Rockefellers. He ended up saying, how the internet should have never been invented. You know, and it's all because information is coming out. Here it is. They brought out the internet to try to help benefit them, but ultimately it ended up biting them in the ass to where now they're being exposed on a high level, you know, damn near every day, or you know pretty much on a daily basis. There's always you know people talking negatively against them. There's uh, pretty much a lot of exposure coming out on the deeds or the misdeeds of these people in the history, you know, of bloodshed that they have on their hands. But let me continue reading a little bit more. It says, this article seeks to address this issue by presenting a comprehensive examination of Jayish participation in the transatlantic slave trade, relying predominantly on scholarly sources authored by Jayish historians. See? So their own, like the scripture said, their own tongue condemneth themselves, or falleth on themselves, right? Roughly paraphrasing. So this is something that, was documented and written down by Jayish historians. You see? But it says, let me go down. So it goes into North America. It says Rhode Island. Rhode Island was undoubtedly the center of the transatlantic slave trade, having more slaves per capita than any other New England state. Newport's Jayish community goes back to 1658, with another influx arriving in 1694 aboard a ship with a number of Jayish families of wealth and respectability on board who settled there, presumably from the Jayish fortress of Curacao. It says two Jayish individuals, Aaron Lopez and his partner Jacob Rodriguez Rivera. Now, people will say, "Oh, because they have Spanish last names that they have to be Hispanic." But this is the thing about modern day people. Modern day people, they don't know nothing about history. Your average American is a goddamn idiot. You know, they don't understand that these tiny tops have changed their names uh, 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 periodically, to hide their identity. You know, but it says owned. Let me read this back. Two Jewish individuals, Aaron Lopez and his partner Jacob Rodriguez Rivera, and and this comes to mind right now. A lot of these uh, uh, um, uh, tiny tops that had these last names. They had you know slaves from South America, Central America. This is the reason why Jake that's down there in these lands right now, Central America, South America, Mexico. A lot of them have Spanish last names because their original name was not in Spanish. They were speaking, whatever broken form of Hebrew that they had at the time, right? The whole thing of Lopez, Rodriguez, you know, whatever all these Sanchez, all these Spanish last names. These all come from small hats, man. You see, but going back because they were living in Spain at the time. When you look at the history of these Jewish people, even back to the end of the medieval period, these people were getting kicked out of all these major empires, man. Various kings would kick them out of the land because of the usury that they would put on the society at that time, right? And also the debaucherous acts that they would commit in these countries, you know. But going back, it says two Jewish individuals, Aaron Lopez and his partner Jacob Rodriguez Rivera, owned the most successful slaving business in the state. They were of Sephardic origin. All 22 Newport distilleries that served the Triangle slave trade were Jayish owned. Even the synagogue of Newport, Rhode Island, was built by African slaves. Nearly all Jays in Newport had Negro domestic slaves. In 1774, census shows only two Newport Jayish families without slaves. Excuse me. So it goes on to say New York, right? It says Jayish merchants in New York largely traded agricultural products for rum, slaves, and manufactured goods. They engaged in trade with fellow Jays in Barbados, um, Curacao, St. Thomas, Suriname, and Jamaica, which were New York's key trade connections beyond England. Notably, Jayish communities had already been established in these ports, giving Jayish businessmen in New York a significant advantage in the West Indian trade over their competitors. Jayish historian Peter Weiner, uh, Wiernick directly asserted that this trade was principally in the hands of the Jays, the tiny tops, right? The 1948ers. So just from this alone, this is showing you who had a major hand in the slave trade, in what you would call New England, right? But it goes on to say, Stanley Feldston describes something similar. America's Jayish merchants using their religio religio commercial connections enjoyed a competitive advantage over many non-Jays engaged in that same lucrative intercolonial trade. Right, because you didn't just have Jays that were involved in the slave. the slave trade, right? You had, even some of the other tribes of Esau. It wasn't just Amalek. Even though Amalek was the main guy, the main one, you had, some of the other tribes of Esau. You had other heathen nations that took part in the transatlantic slave trade. Ham, Ishmael, right? You also have the trans-Saharan slave trade, you know. So Jake was just scattered everywhere, and when you read Psalms 83, it goes into all these nations that had a hand in our demise, right? But let's continue on. It says, since the West Indian trade was a necessity to America's economy, and since this trade was in varying degrees controlled by Jewish mercantile houses, American jewelry was influential in the commercial destiny of Britain's overseas empire, right? They had a major hand, man. You see? But it says in 1717 and 1721, two ships, the Crown and the New York Postilion, um, which were owned by Jewish businessman Nathan Simpson. And these are names you gotta write down. These are names you gotta you know remember, because these guys were some of the major importers and exporters of slaves, man. But it says Nathan Simpson arrived at the northern harbor with a total of 217 slaves. These shipments arrived directly from the African shore and were marked as two of the largest slave cargoes to be brought into New York in the first half of the 18th century. On several occasions, excuse me, on several occasions, Jewish merchants in New York were found guilty of selling mentally impaired and unhealthy slaves that they had falsely claimed to be fit and healthy. In 1741, slaves owned by the Gomez family, often described as the heads of the J-ish community, were implicated in a suspected riot and insurrection. It says Samson Simpson, recognized as one of the leading figures of the New York Chamber of Commerce and a key contributor to its constitution, was the most prominent J-ish trader in New York between 1757 and 1773. He owned several ships involved in trade with both the East and West Indies. And I guess this is some pictures, right? It says J-ish slave advertisements from various newspapers from the book Jays and Negro Slavery in the Old South. I can't really, I mean, I can see it, but I can't really read it very well. But it says in Virginia, numerous Jays immigrated to Virginia and integrated into the plantation economy. Elias Largo arrived on the ship Abigail in 1621, while Joseph Moose and Rebecca Isaac arrived on the Elizabeth in 1624. Manuel Rodriguez owned a plantation in Lancaster County by 1652, and David da Costa was exporting tobacco from his plantation by 1658. And best believe they used slaves for this, man. They weren't doing this on their own, right? But it says the two previously mentioned vessels, Abigail and Elizabeth, are among the most well known slave ships. The following image is extracted from the four-volume series titled Documents Illustrative of the History of the Slave Trade to America by historian Elizabeth Donham, and it documents the Jayish owned ships that played a significant role in the Atlantic slave trade. And it goes right here. Look at all this. Abigail, owned by Aaron Lopez, Moses Levy, and Jacob Franks. Look at the ethnicity. Look at all this. All these people were Jays, man. The Crown, Nassau, the Four Sisters, all these were owned by Jays, man. Now these are all ships, right? That I'm naming, right? You had the Anne and Alyssa, the Prudent Betty, Hester, Elizabeth, Antigua, uh, Betsy, Polly, White Horse, Expedition, Charlotte, Caracal. All these were owned by Jays, man. Tiny tops. But it goes on to say, The founders of Richmond's Jays community included prominent individuals such as Samuel Myers, Solomon Jacobs, Israel and Jacob I, Cohen, Jacob Mordecai, Jacob Marks, and Manuel Judah, all of whom were slaveholders. In the post revolutionary era, Richmond had a population of 2,000, with half being slaves. By 1788, Jays constituted 17% of the white population, and all but one Jay household owned a domestic servant, one or slave, right? I mean, that's pretty much what it means, domestic servant. You have a slave. It says one of them had three. It says historian Myron Berman affirms in his Richmond's Jewry, 1769 to 1976 book that most of the Jays of Richmond in the early 19th century possessed slaves. It goes on to say South Carolina. In 1826, the total volume of of slaves in the South was approximately $300 million, uh, with about one fifth belonging to residents in South Carolina. The demand for slaves had increased so significantly that by 1860, a slave's value was 7 to 10 times higher than at the end of the Revolutionary War. Charleston, South Carolina, was home to the most cultured and wealthiest Jayish community in America. The Jayish community in Charleston flourished initially due to a thriving business in slaves. This city was once one of the great centers of Jewish commerce, which had a decline only after the emancipation of slaves. So you see, man, and I didn't know this. I didn't know, that even in South Carolina, these Jays had a hand in all this, man. You see, this is the thing, man. These devils are now being exposed of the crimes they have committed, man. All this history that they have hidden, and they say this in what's that quote? How's it go? Pretty much, if you want to hide something, pretty much hide it in the book, and that's exactly what they've done. There's a lot of books that we don't know about that cost like 400, 500, up to like ten thousands of dollars. You know, that have valuable information or historical records of these motherfuckers having in hand in our demise. You see? But continuing on, uh, it says Georgia. In 1733, a group of Jayish immigrants arrived in Georgia from London as land grants were being distributed. It says Georgia was the first colony to explicitly prohibit slavery, a policy that significantly impacted the settlements. Similar to the Caribbean, uh, the settlers soon felt they could not sustain their livelihoods without black slaves, and they petitioned the England trustees for the right to use Negro labor. With Jays now making up over a third of the population, they sought permission from the Gentile colonists to be allowed to sign the petition. However, the Gentiles refused, stating that it was not appropriate for Jays to join them. The trustees' refusal to grant the permission led to a mass exodus from the colony. Due to the slave prohibition, only three Jayish families remained in Georgia by 1740. They left, as noted by Jacob Ratter Marcus, for the same reason the others did. Negro slavery was prohibited, and the liquor traffic was forbidden. See, and that's man, that's these small hats, uh, 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 uh top two commodities, man, or top two forms of traffic: liquor and slaves. What they call liquor, fire water, right? But it says the Earl and Egmont document in his diary of 1741 that all the Jays were gone from Savannah, Georgia. Man, and they all left because they couldn't own slaves. But let me see. Let me just go down here. So here's a little graph. It says major Jayish cotton dealers. So it shows a map of where these damn devils were, right? But it says illustrated map of the major J-ish cotton dealers in the South American South, or in the Salakia, in the American South. You see? Um, okay, it goes into USA. It says the 18 in 1860, the peak of slavery, the total free population of the United States and its territories was 27,489,561. A total of 393,975 people were owned. 3,953,760 slaves. That's just 1.4% of the total population that owns slaves. 40% of Jays in the United States own slaves. Other sources have it much higher, 60 plus, 60% plus. There were 200,000 Jays in the US in 1860. 40% of 200,000 equals 80,000. So around 80,000 Jews owned slaves. 393,975 to 800 to, I mean, Slovakia to 80,000 equals 313,975 non-Jays owned slaves. It says, thus, at a minimum, well over 20% of all U.S. slave owners were Jays, despite being statistically insignificant. 0.7% of the population at the time. The actual percentage was likely much higher. Right. So now it goes into South American and the Caribbean. Right. It goes into the Brazil. Because you had the Jays in all these different places. It says Portuguese Jays. Right. Because you had Jays in Portugal. Right. These Jays were everywhere, man. That's what you gotta have in mind. The Most High allowed them, as the scripture says, to spread themselves like a green bay tree. And that's not only just in power. They were everywhere. They were just everywhere, man. It says Curacao, Barbados, Jamaica. I'm just kind of scamming through this, man, because I want to get some precepts out. But it says Martinique. Excuse me. It says Nevis, Saint Domingue, Suriname. Okay, so that's pretty much it. This is a conclusion, right? So I'm gonna read this real quick. It says this article draws extensively on the research presented in the excellent book, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jays, the Jayish Role in the Enslavement of the African by the Nation of Islam. Additionally, the Nation of Islam's Jays Selling Blacks slave sale advertising by American Jays offers a significant compilation of historical advertisements from American newspapers highlighting Jayish involvement in the buying, selling, and ownership of slaves. Readers interested in further exploring the subject are encouraged to read these works for a deeper understanding. Right. So I'll stop right there. Right. Um, well, let me read this real quick. Let me just finish this out. It says, finally, the inspiration for this article was the excellent book, The Jayish Onslaught by Tony Martin, an academic and professor who had received multiple awards and honors for the American Philosophical Society. The book exposes a well documented Jayish role in the Atlantic slave trade. In the link below, you'll find a 2-hour lecture by Tony Martin about the Jayish role in the trading of African slaves. So yeah, I'm gonna put this link in the description box, so those who watch this can read this for themselves. But that's pretty much the point on this, man. These small hats, the the history of them having a hand in the trafficking, the buying and selling of slaves, you know, has been hidden. But now, like I said, now all this is coming out, all this is being exposed, right? And this is all due to prophecy, man. The Most High is lifting up that skirt, right? So let's go ahead and get some precepts. Let's start off with Ezekiel 28 and verse 4. It says, "With thy wisdom and with thine understanding, thou hast gotten thee riches, and hast gotten gold and silver into thy treasuries. By thy great wisdom and by thy traffic hast thou increased thy riches." Right? That traffic going into the trafficking of slaves. Right? Through the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, the trans-Saharan slave trade, and really there's more than that, you know what I'm saying? But those are the two main ones, the major ones, and best believe Amalek had a major hand in all these. We just read all these major guys, all these devils that uh, 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 were like top uh, businessmen in this field, right? And through this, they were able to amass all this wealth and gain all this power, right? But verse 5, excuse me, it says, "By thy great wisdom and by thy traffic hast thou increased thy riches, and thine heart is lifted up because of thy riches." Right? So let's get Zechariah 11 and verse 5. As a matter of fact, I'll start at 4. Thus saith the Lord power, or thus saith the Lord my power, feed the flock of the slaughter, whose possessors slay them and hold themselves not guilty. And they that sell them say, Blessed be the Lord, for I am rich, and their own shepherds pity them not. You see? And that's exactly what Esau thought, man. Esau would praise the Most High for uh, 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 all the uh, all the profit that he was able to gain off of selling you tribes. Because, like I said, he didn't just sell uh, uh, Southern Kingdom. He also sold Northern Kingdom, and that doesn't even go. And that article didn't even go into the origin, of what actually happened and how it happened. Right? That's just a portion. Right? It's just going into the. It just starts off in whatever 1600s, the late 1600s. Right? But anyway, let me see. I believe what's his name, Cristobal Colon, whom you call Christopher Columbus. He was a J. And you see all the wickedness he did, right? But let me see. Let's go to uh Second Thessalonians, because like I said, all this exposure is happening, and it's happening now in these last days, right? It says, "Let no man deceive you." Second Thessalonians 2 and 3. "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come." What day? That's talking about the end, right? The end ain't gonna come until this happens. "For that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first." Right? We fell away, we fell away from our heritage, right? But now we're coming back. But it says, "And that man of sin be revealed." Who's that man of sin? It's talking about Esau, right? And now he's being revealed. It's being revealed who is the devil that the Bible speaks of, right? Being the so-called white man, right? And predominantly the house of Amalek, right? But also all these Edomites, they're all uh, 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 um the devil that the Bible speaks of, right? The children of Satan, right? But it says, um, "And that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." You see? Let's get another one. Let's get Jeremiah 49 and verse 10. It says, "But I have made Esau bare, I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is spoiled, and his brethren, and his neighbors, and he is not." You see? So the Most High is lifting up that skirt. The Most High is revealing his actions, revealing all the history that of the atrocities that he has committed, right? In his role in the capturing and enslavement of the children of the Most High. See? But let me read this back. It says, "But I have made Esau bare, I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself." Right, so he can't hide no more. It's coming to the point where, because he can't hide himself, now he needs to attack the world. Now he has to point the finger, calling everybody anti-Shem, saying all this is hate speech, right? But let me see. It says his seed is spoiled, and his brethren, his neighbors, and he is not. Right, because soon, he's gonna be destroyed. Soon, when the kingdom of heaven gets established, and those 1,000 years of him being in captivity are fulfilled, there's gonna be no need for this man, and then he's gonna exist no more. The whole lineage of Esau is gonna be annihilated. What you'll call genocide, right? But it says that's pretty much it. Let's go to Psalms 83, as I quoted earlier. This is Psalms 83, and I'll start at the top. It says, keep not thou silence, O power, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O power. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. Right, they have taken crafty counsel, man. They planned this whole scheme out, right? Esau and the major houses of all these heathen nations, they all got together and plotted this major scheme, this major conspiracy to take down the nation of Israel, so that their name will be no more in remembrance. As a matter of fact, it's going to say it. But verse 4, it says, "When they have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance," right? By stripping away our heritage from us, by calling us black, African American, Hispanic, Indian, Native American, right? And all these, proverbs and bywords, and then feeding us, a culture that's not of our own, right? This is how they were able to strip the name of Israel out of remembrance. See, but it says, verse 5, "For they have consulted together with one consent; they are confederate against thee." See, they are confederate together, man. See, and that's one thing about Jake. Jake feels like they have no enemies. Just because you're living in the so-called new world, you think that everything changed. You know, the old um the old the that whole era of the 19 I mean not 19 the whole era of 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, all the way up to the early 1900s, that those people that talking about the Edomites, that hatred that they had back then, that hatred is not in these Edomites today. But that's not the case. The scriptures talk about uh, uh, um, can the Ethiopian change his skin, or the leper his spots? And he that is accustomed to do good, that he that is accustomed to do evil, can he do good? Right? Roughly paraphrasing. But the point being that these devils have not changed. You see? Because otherwise, they will tell us who we are. They will give us the real information, you know. But we understand that it is not in their heart to repent. Shit, in the scriptures, it talks about that even in the kingdom, that they're not going to be repentful of what they had done, right? But anyway, going down to verse 6, it says, "The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites of Moab and the Hagarenes, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Ashur also join with them. They have hope in the children of Lot." So all these nations, have taken hand, and there's more too. All nations have had their part in the enslavement of Israel, right? This is why vengeance is coming upon them. Everything you see what's going on around the world are signs of the Lord's return, right? Our Lord Yahushua is on his way home, or on his way back, I should say, right? And he's coming to visit the house of Esau first, and all these nations, and take them all down, man. You see? But anyway, um, just to add to that point, though, let's get Zechariah 1 and verse 15. It says, "And I am very sore displeased with the heathen that are at ease, for I was but a little displeased, and they helped for the affliction." You see? So these heathen nations, uh, not just Esau, but all these other ones, right? They have judgment waiting for them as well for the shit that they had done, right? So they ain't exempt either. You know that they ain't as Nahum 1 and 3 says, they're not acquitted, right? Scripture says that the Most High will not acquit the wicked, but also these heathen nations, right? The first 1,000 years of the kingdom of heaven being established, you know, what the scriptures call the first dominion, that's gonna be us putting punishments upon these heathen nations, bringing hell. It's gonna be the scriptures call uh well, pretty much it's a rulership of uh pretty much an iron fist type of rulership, right? Which is a very harsh rulership, man. We're gonna be very strict with these heathen, right? Very strict. We're gonna be very stern. And we're gonna be executing judgment, man. Harsh judgment. You see? But you know this is what's in store for all the you know, pretty much for the atrocities they committed against our people, right? Now let's get this. Revelation 13 and verse 10, because this is what we're going to do is going to be just, right? It's going to be a righteous judgment. You see, it says, verse Revelation 13 and 10, "He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints." Right. So, hey, it's going to be eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Right. What you did to us, we're going to do to you. Now we ain't going to do none of that wicked shit that Esau did, eating our flesh, and you know, buck breaking and all that, you know, fucked up shit that he did. But we are going to be executing heavy judgment, harsh judgment. We're going to be we're going to be splitting y'all in half. We're going to be, man, the scriptures talk about that we shall meditate terror, man. So we don't know what we're going to be doing, but it's going to be some horrific shit. We're going to be doing some terrifying shit to these heathen. Motherfuckers going to be having PTSD for the remainder of their existence, to where they won't even dare to try to mess with us, right? Now let's go ahead and get this one. I'm gonna close it off with this Psalm 149, right? We always get this, and I'm gonna start at verse 5. It says, "Let the saints be joyful in glory, let them sing aloud upon their beds, let the high praises of the Most High be in their mouth," right? Call hallelujah, how about Shemi Shai? Because we best believe we're gonna be praising the Lord, man. That finally we're on top. We're gonna have the whole world under our feet, right? But it says, "And a two-edged sword in their hand, to execute vengeance upon the heathen and punishments upon the people." See, we're going to be executing vengeance, right? The scriptures talk about how the Most High is going to use His people, you know, to execute vengeance. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can find it. Bear with me. Right here, Ezekiel 25 and verse 14. "And I will lay vengeance, it's like, and I will lay my vengeance." So the Lord's vengeance, right? It says, "And I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hand of my people Israel, and they shall do in Edom according to mine anger and according to my fury." Right? Because right now we don't got that fury. I mean, you see Jake right now. Jake is trying to save the white man, right? But even us that know the truth, you know, we don't have that anger, man. Right? Yeah, brothers are angry, man. Bro, hey, I'm angry. Reading this shit makes me angry. But the shit that we don't know about, you know, and then the Most High is gonna probably, you know, put it in us to remember all the shit that this man has done to our people. Man, we're gonna be, man, we're gonna be some angry motherfuckers, man. We're really gonna be executing some harsh punishments on these damn Edomites and the rest of these heathen. But it says, and they shall do in Edom according to mine anger and according to my fury, and they shall know my vengeance, saith the Lord power. You see? So going back, Psalms 149 and verse 8, it says to bind their kings with chains, right? So the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Gettys, the Bilderbergs, all these top major families, you know, your elites, your what you'll call Illuminati, right? It says to bind their kings with chains and their nobles with fetters of iron, to execute upon them the judgment written. This honor have all his saints. Praise ye the Lord. You see, we're going to be executing judgment, you know, in the kingdom. And like I said, it's all going to be righteous judgment. This this is their how would you put it? Uh, their just punishment, I guess you could say, right? But yeah, you know, that was pretty much it, man. You know, this history of the Jays having a hand, you know, in our captivity. You know, this is just like I said, this is just scratching the surface, man. It goes way deeper than this, right? You know, they're the ones that orchestrated the whole gathering. You know, when you read Psalms 83, you know, who were the first what was the first name called out? The house of Edom. You see, and then it says Amalek, so it's twice it mentions the house of Edom. But anyway, you know, that was pretty much it. Lord willing, that was edifying. I'm gonna go ahead and close it out by giving all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachak, Quadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who taught me this truth and rule well. Peace and blessings unto the hopeful elect, pushing his word throughout the four corners of the earth in truth, righteousness, and sincerity. Until the next time, I'm gonna say Shalom, Kwam Yasha Allah.